I only have 5 tabs open.
I know. Stampede week. All right. Hey. I guess this should say Caitlin and Adam. We're both here. Who's
That's
this
okay.
guy?
It's the Caitlin show.
It's the Caitlin
It's the Caitlin
show.
show.
That's how it is every day.
Yeah.
You got a high kick.
Yeah.
It's been a while since we've had a high kick. Used to be a thing.
That is
Whenever
true.
I was excited in meetings, they'd get a high kick. Okay, so today, culture, but we're talking about culture in how it shifts and what the dynamic is around organizational change, because it causes it to go into flux, right?
Mhm.
So what are your initial thoughts around change? Maybe we should specify which kind of change. Like there's improvement change, there's acquisitions, there's mergers, there's so much change that can happen. So let's maybe pick some changes and talk about.
I don't know. Change is a funny thing, and people are funny about change. So maybe, my initial comment on change is when people naturally resist change. They don't want to change. They like it this way. Why are we now doing it this way? Right?
Change hurts.
And you probably can think of examples in your own life where, that's why moving is hard and stressful, or going to a new job, it's very emotional, right? However, when we are never more miserable than when things don't change for too long. So we are this forever, this weird, like, fighting against ourselves in that.
You see that comic where it's like, who wants change? And everybody raises their hands, and then it's like, who wants to change? And there's nobody.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, this is exactly the situation we as humans find ourselves in, right? It makes no sense. We're like, we want it, but we don't want it. Or we want it now, but not later, or later, but not now, or this much, but not that much. And like,
we want it, but we don't want the pain of it.
Yeah.
It's a struggle.
It always, it's that J-shaped curve, right? It's going to get worse before it gets better in some fashion.
Always.
Right?
You know what's funny? I love change. Like, I love sitting in that uncomfortable zone.
But I think that also comes with practice.
Maybe. Yeah.
Right? People, like, as entrepreneurs, like, I can't remember last time I felt comfortable. Right? So you get used to living in that uncomfortable zone, and it actually becomes like addictive.
Almost, right? If it's too status quo, you're like, ugh. Let's go start another business.
So you can, I think, your mindset shifts if you spend a lot of time being uncomfortable. You start to enjoy the growth, right? It's like exercise. If you exercise first, you hate it, but then after a while, your brain actually gets addicted to the chemicals that are released when you exercise. So you're right.
And maybe, and I'm just thinking out loud, guys, this is maybe there is a little bit to, like, when entrepreneurs start, everybody who is in a small entrepreneurial company has that same mentality, like, change, what's next, like, dynamic, I'm wearing multiple hats, I'm used to it, they're comfortable now, otherwise they won't stick around, right? And then you get more systematic, and you lose that. And so then your culture, in a sense, becomes one of less change because you've grown, you become systematic, you become more processed. So the people who thrive on that, like, constant change dynamic maybe lose their connection. And they're like, oh, remember the good old days. This is the one thing that we always hear. Remember the good old days, right? And so maybe the culture does change the more systematic you get and causes those people. So how do you keep them engaged?
Well, I think things like innovation or creativity are thrown around pretty cavalier these days. But I had this conversation recently on a podcast, actually, and we talked about exactly this, right? Like high risk when you're smaller, so you have to just like be this crazy, dynamic, malleable thing in order to adjust and react to those risks and all that. But then you kind of develop a little bit of stability, and now the risks change a little bit, and now you need to be a little more stable. So then, wherein do you find this innovation? And I think you can find innovation anywhere. It's the smallest little constant improvements. It's the like, this template sucks, I'm going to build a different one. Or hey, I think our agenda could be improved for our meeting. Or like, why are we even having this meeting? Like, there's so many places for your voice to be heard. Now, it's maybe not going to replace that like raw carnal excitement of a brand new startup, but companies can also carve out space for that stuff to exist. You can have a little R&D space.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, I love this. I heard this in a talk a while back, and it was innovate from the outside, because and this is where I like change, so organizational change, right? As we talk about like, oh, you're getting a new system, or you're maybe developing a new product or whatever, this kind of organizational change that happens through the growth of an organization. It can be painful for people who are used to systematic operations, right? And we see all this all the time, because we have a couple of our employees who are very like, this is the process, this is the system, and then I come along and I'm a duck that does not stay in the pond. Eunice, that's for you. And I like love to just create and innovate and like try this and try that, and it's very frustrating. So this innovate from the outside, where there's this like protected zone where people are innovating before it gets into operations, right? So these people stay and they're like calm, like, yes, this is how we do business, and they thrive on that. And then the people who thrive on change and dynamic and innovation stay here until they're ready to meet in the middle, and then the change impact is less. Right? Because then they have a proper change plan. We're like, okay, we're operations ready, right? And this innovate from the outside has to make it operations ready. You can't just throw it over the fence and be like, figure it out, ops, right? But they make it operational ready.
Well, and this is, we recently created a change plan for a major change for a client, and there's power in this, right? Because you create this new system, you've got documents and you've got tools and all this stuff, and then most of the time you're like, okay, here, everybody use this now, right? You host a kind of a training session over months, just how it all works. This is where you find the stuff. This is who you ask. Any questions? Okay, go. And that's fine. People are aware of it now, but like the change plan was like very involved. It was very interactive in getting feedback on how they wanted to do it. Do they want it to be all at once? Do they want it to be a little bit at a time? Do they want it a mix of both? And how's it going to be communicated, and what different ways will it be communicated? Is there going to be an email? Is there going to be a best practices poster that's going up and changing? Is there going to be a video? Is there going to be multiple videos? Right? Like, and then kind of spread out over months to like get people, get it in front of them and in their face. And like this, you can treat change like a project in itself. You have someone that manages it, right?
It is a project in itself.
Someone that checks in. How's everybody going? Feedback. Okay, how's the change going? Where's the box where I put the paper? It says, I hate the red button.
Yeah.
Right?
Did you know that this was happening? How well was our communication in the change? Sure. And the other thing I think is really important when you're leading change, or, and to understand, and we came up with a fun game. And a shout out to Jorge, right? Jorge's Bridge, this fun team building game that we do around our change workshop. And it is, you identify change resistance types. You've got those people who are all for change, and like they're your early adopters, your change champions. Perfect. right? You have people who are skeptical because they've been burned by change before. So they're like, I don't know. I don't believe this, right? There's people who, worried that their role is going to disappear, right? So they're trying to hold on to what they have. There's people who are worried that it's going to put more on their plate and they're already overwhelmed. And like, so if you don't address the individual, like what's in it for me, what concerns and how they're going to show up, like you're going to have a bunch of change resistance. So how do you recognize those types of people, right? And how do you embrace them in a way that calms their fear and increases the desire, right?
Well,
and it's individualistic.
What I love about this game is it really highlights very quickly what happens. So we say, okay, 9 people stand over here, 1 person stand over here. This person has a scenario. Convince these 9 people to come over to your side of the room.
And everybody has a role they have to play and a level of change resistance that they're to give, right? And until these things get identified and answered for them, they are not allowed to cross the bridge.
Mm-hmm. And I think what happens is the one person gets all excited and starts to kind of, okay, come on over here. It's so amazing over here, blah, blah, blah. And starts to list all the things. And for a few people, they might ask a few questions. And then, based on their personality, that their role that they're playing, they might cross. But for many of them, they don't cross and they don't cross and they don't cross. And at the end, they never convince them. And then we look at it and we talk about it. And they're like, well, who did all the talking this whole time? You did. This person just wanted to feel heard. So
right?
That's it.
Listening to the people who it's going to impact.
Yeah, you needed to create a space for them to feel heard and express their concerns. That's all they needed, right? And then they would have crossed no problem.
Yeah.
So it's kind of a cool epiphany.
And this is so important. For this change plan we recently did for that client is like we had their attention in a workshop. And so we asked them, how do you guys want to receive this? Like, there's going to be pieces. We can piecemeal it out. We can wait till it's all done, give it all at once. How do you want to receive it? And, all but maybe 3 people in the room didn't want a 2-day intensive training. They're like, I'm going to get trained and then I'm going to use it maybe a month later or 2 months later. And then I'm going to have questions. So we actually designed the change based on how they were going to process it and then use it. And it was really, I think, a powerful insight to have that in the change plan, to be able to say, okay, this is what your people wanted. So when they see it come out, they're going to be like, this is exactly how we asked for it. It already it eliminates a barrier to buy-in. Mm-hmm. But I mean, back to the whole culture thing, you have individual concerns, but you also have company culture that impacts change as well, right? So if your company culture is not defined and it's not aligned, you can't use that in any way to drive behaviors through your change, right? If it says we're flexible and dynamic, but you're really not, you might think, oh, this is going to be an easy change. We're flexible and dynamic. Not when you actually look at your behaviors, right? So I think it's really important to understand the culture that you're trying to affect change in, the real culture, not necessarily what's on the wall, because we know that's not always accurate, but really understand the culture of what and the dynamic of what's going on, as well as the individual. It's not easy. Change is not easy.
This is why culture is complicated.
And culture is complicated.
It's a mess. If I try and picture in my head what you just said, I picture just like a swirling, I don't know, it's like taking paints and just mixing them all together.
And all looks like shit in the end.
Right? And it's moving. It's a moving target. It's like this. It's like trying to control this. And you can't. And I think that is very frustrating for leaders, for businesses, whatever. Yeah. All you can do is sort of influence it, create a space where hopefully it kind of moves over here,
right?
But it might move over there, so you got to adjust. It's just this constant flow of emotional energy. We apply intellectual constructs to it, but you can't ignore the emotional piece.
You cannot.
And I think this is where we miss a lot of times. Hey, look at this ERP. It's amazing. It checks all the boxes. Everybody use it. And
and you look at the change processes, they're very create awareness, create desire. Okay, but in that create desire, that is a huge thing. You're creating desire. It's not just a matter of here's heaven, here's hell.
Yeah, and I think historically in these change models, it's not people haven't thought about it. They're there, but we treat them as like the smallest little prelude, right? It's like the once upon a time, now the story starts, right?
Yeah.
When I think what we're trying to say is actually it's the reverse. It's the biggest piece. The rest, don't worry about it. It'll fall into place if you deal with this.
Yeah. Like
Right.
creating awareness and desire is probably the biggest element of change, because you're right. The adoption, the like figuring out the abilities, the training, that's all useless if they don't want to do it. Like it's all useless.
Yeah.
So
if I'm mad about it or whatever, right?
Yeah.
And sometimes people don't even recognize how they're feeling about it. They just know that they don't like it, right?
exactly.
And as a leader, trying to talk to people and kind of work through that process. People have different levels of self-awareness around things like this.
Yeah.
Right? So it's tricky. But I think there's some tricks of the trade, right? There's things like recognizing who your champions or influencers are, right? It's a game of influence.
It's a game of influence.
Right? You can't be authoritative about it. Thou shalt use this.
I mean, you can if you have that kind of company.
Fair. But you're going to be more, I think, successful is if you know who your influencers are, your early adopters, right? Who are the people in your company? And every time I've said this to a business owner, I can see them in their face. They like immediately, like 3-4 names came. They know exactly who they're kind of, it's the people in your company that put up their hand like, yeah, sure, I'll organize a barbecue. No problem. Like, doesn't matter what they're doing. They love
they're in
extra projects, right?
Yeah, they're in. They're like bought in no matter what. It's like, tell me, okay, I'm in. Like, where do I have to be? I'm going to show up. Influencers in your company, and especially in big companies that aren't aligned.
Yeah.
And they're going to cause like the resistance, right? So like if you have an influencer in your company, and this is a person regardless of authority, what they say people follow, and you can find them. Like you see who they are. They'll create cliques, they'll create like groups, right? These influencers, if you can get them bought in ahead of time, you're going to minimize the change resistance. Because if you address their concerns specifically, right? And you say, okay, we're trying this. I want your specific insights because I know that this might be not exactly what you would want. Can you give me some feedback so we can make it so that it works? Like get their early buy-in. And then when it comes out, they'll be like, oh yeah, no, I had a say in that. It's good. And then all of a sudden, all the people who listen to those guys, they just right in.
Examples of these types of people, I think, like when I think back to my engineering days, it's usually the senior engineer who's been there the longest, never wanted to get into management, but kind of like, is the smartest guy in the room all the time.
Because he's mentoring, so he's got this influence.
That's your person, right?
Yeah.
Other people that are just kind of louder personalities, like we see this actually in facilitations and workshops all the time, right? We'll know within an hour who the 3 people in the room we have to convince that this is worth their time, and then the rest kind of like come along. Right? It's really interesting to see it through the lens of a facilitator and just kind of why we don't know these people at all. We walk in and then we're challenged, definitely at the beginning, by 2 or 3 people, and if we can work through that, the rest come along, and we can tell when that's shifted over, right?
Or hasn't shifted over sometimes. Like sometimes you never get their buy-in.
But I think that's the key to the whole thing, right? Simon Sinek talks about this law of diffusion of innovation, right? It's like, don't try and convince the masses. Marketing's the same. Just like find your early adopters, find your influencers, and convince them.
That's it.
They will convince everybody else.
Yeah.
That's it. That's the the task. And sometimes it's I think feels strange, if you're kind of trying to implement some kind of major change, you only grab a small subset and you work on them and spend all this time and energy on them instead of like trying to like get everybody involved, but like resist that a little bit.
Now, this is all organizational change, right? But there's change that happens kind of like mergers and acquisitions. right? And these ones are unique changes in that you're actually like smashing two cultures together, either with desire or without desire. You know, like either like it's a merger and everybody's excited about it because they've like said, oh, you know, our companies work together so often and it's great. And there might be some little culture nuances that are different, but a lot of times it's not desirable. It's like an acquisition because they had to, and the cultures are very different. And I find that a lot of companies don't even do a culture check to see what the gap is and to then have a strategy to bridge that gap, right? And I use my sister-in-law as an example. Her company got acquired, her engineering firm got acquired, and they did not do that. And it was like, here's our culture, here's our process, eat it. Right. And it was frustrating. And they were like, just pushed down their throats and nothing. It was like worse benefits and all this stuff. And so like, it felt like a really hostile takeover and it was not well received. And because they didn't check in and see how they were doing, like, you know, she got a bunch of other offers and peace out. But then 20 people also left.
Yeah, that's usually what happens, right? You acquire a company either for their client list,
their projects,
or their expertise or whatever, and then you tie some golden handcuffs around keeping people. But when that's over,
if they're not bought in.
And I think this is back to this emotional piece, right? We intellectually kind of merge accounting systems and HR systems and neglect the biggest piece in the room.
The people systems.
Even things like location, because sometimes when you merge, everyone moves to like one office or something like that. But like there's memory tied to location. This is the room where we always have the party when someone new starts, and it's my favorite thing, and blah blah blah. And now in this new place, the room's not big enough, or we just don't do it anymore, or whatever. Like, there's memory and emotion tied to location.
Absolutely.
And, tied to that's my office and that's your office, and like, so if you don't try and kind of reinvent new memories and new emotion with the new mix, then all you got is people dwelling on the good old days and looking right. It's like you'll notice what you look for. You look for reasons to be frustrated. You look for, I hate the new stationery. I can never find a pen. Like you'll find reasons to be frustrated with the new regime, or you'll find reasons why it's awesome.
And this is why I think mergers or acquisitions particularly, they actually budget in for a significant portion of people to leave, like 70% over 3 years. They budget it in. Okay, now, and you've got to think, to replace a senior technical person like an engineer would be $160,000. This is conservative, guys, $160,000 per person over 3 years. Now multiply that out by like a 100-person company. It's millions of dollars. Don't tell me you can't invest up front in trying to do cultural alignment. Like, give me a break. Like, you could do so much with that. Not to mention all the tribal knowledge you're bringing forward that, like, they have this of their clients and all of that aspect. You can't teach that. You can't onboard those people to 10 years of client relationships. Like, it is so freaking valuable to invest in a cultural alignment. And it doesn't even need to be like, well, we're the big acquiring company, we're not going to change. That's fine. How do you welcome them in a way that they feel inspired? How do you connect their culture to your culture? There's ways to do this. There are ways to do this, and you could save millions of dollars. So stop budgeting it into your acquisition and start budgeting it up front.
Well, I think this is maybe the question we're trying to ask here, right? Is, okay, great. We grow by acquisition. We have a formula we use and we budget. We don't question it. We know this happens, but that's just how we grow. But I think what we're challenging that is like, okay, great. You budget for 70% of the people to leave within 5 years or whatever. But like, what if they didn't? That's what we're trying to ask here. Like, what if you could change that? And I think that's a really interesting question. And, it gives you pause. It's harder.
It's a bit more work.
Energy.
Well, you get companies like us.
Sure, yeah. Like,
just call us.
Sure, right?
Who are you gonna call?
There's an easy button there for you, right? Consultants are good for this type of thing because they're impartial. They're not emotionally torn in any direction.
They're not bringing any history into it.
Yeah, and there's sometimes a neutral party, right? And sometimes there's politics involved, and like, right? So, changes change is tricky, but you have to treat it.
Well, I love this. We did this for a merger.
Hmm.
We did this for like two engineering firms were merging, and they, they're like, oh, we think we're pretty like similar culture, but we did it. It was so funny when we started. Like you could tell who is from what company.
Yeah.
You could tell by how they talked, how they sat, blah, blah, blah. And by the end of the 2 days, you could not.
Yeah, it was very. I mean, so corporately they had their values defined, but then the two groups in Calgary said, "Well, let's define our values for our group and see how they relate to like the big picture."
Mm-hmm.
So going through that process was really awesome for them. I think a lot of storytelling, a lot of mixing. The body language was like changing.
Oh,
Mekki's sitting with electrical engineers, which is like unheard of. And it was it was really good. It was really powerful.
It is powerful. So like you said, imagine if you did an acquisition and you got to keep the top talent.
What would happen, right? It's the same thing with productivity. Like, what if you acquired these people, most of the people stayed, and your productivity went up 20%? What would that mean for your bottom line?
Well,
what if? Right?
You can find out soon because I'm putting on a ROI culture calculator to our website that'll be launching, our new website that'll be launching in August. So you could actually find out
there you go
the actual dollar amount. Some basic assumptions there, but I'm an engineer, so there's a safety factor.
There you go. Right? So I think more and more as people have this conversation, there is an argument to recognize the ROI on paying attention to this emotional culture of your business.
Yeah.
So to summarize, change.
Wait, we got 4 minutes. We have a change coming up.
We do. Yeah.
So let's work through this because we have not. I'm throwing this at Adam right now. This is great. Live. Here we go. Saturday night. Okay. We are changing locations.
Mm-hmm. We are.
And so we have some people who are really excited.
Mm-hmm.
Some people who don't care because they live far away.
Sure.
And we have some people who are like, not even really aware yet. Or it isn't a driving desire for them because they show up every once in a while.
Sure, pretty neutral about it, I think. But we talked about it actually being a good thing. I got one of the reasons because it could have gone either way. We could have stayed, we could have went, kind of leaning towards going, but it wasn't like urgent, right? But we talked about, hey, go into a new space, kind of this like it will actually energize everybody. We've personally, as a company, we've grown a lot this year. We've learned a lot. We've gone through a lot of pain. So I think people are just feeling a little bit of change fatigue is kind of my sense is like, right?
Yeah.
So a new place, kind of like, hey, just like, let's, check this out and recharge a bit is my hope.
And not like your change fatigue, here's another change.
Yeah. Well, that's what we want to avoid.
Yeah.
Right.
And I think the first step is asking them, like, how are they feeling about this? Right. Mm-hmm. Like, guys, we know we've been talking about moving offices for a while. Like it's happening. How are you guys feeling? Are you feeling stressed? Are you feeling worried? What are your fears? Like ask people. Like, and we have a really good psychological safety with our team. So they'll tell us 9 times out of 10, right, what they're worried about. And so we can address it very specifically. But I think like, do you ever feel like frustrated and you change the layout in your like living room and it feels fresh again and it feels like this excitement without it being like, oh my gosh, a whole new house, right? I think that like just that little change of like a new atmosphere can be powerful.
Oh, 100%. Just turn your table 90 degrees and see what happens.
Okay. We are putting this on the docket. We do have 1 minute left. We are going to put on the docket to talk about, and I bet we can have a guest come in, how your setup can influence culture. Because I think companies need to reevaluate what it means to have an office space, guys, because nobody wants to come back to your cubicles. I am sorry. Like, I don't want to leave my house where I work alone to go all the way into an office to work alone. Like, reimagine what workspace looks like, and you will convince your people. You'll inspire them to be there. So a whole new topic next time. We'll talk about that. But if you are doing change, consider culture. And consider how you influence people, right?
There it is.
There it is. Boom. appreciate you guys. We will see you next week. And yeah, I'm really excited to talk about like physical space and how it influences culture.
Got lots to say.
I'll try to let him say something more once.
Yeah.
All right, guys, we'll see you next week. Appreciate you all.